Hey, welcome back to another great video. So today we are going to set up Redux in Next.js application in less than 5 minutes. So if you see on the screen, you can see the Medium article that I wrote. I will be attaching the link in the description for the same. And it is basically going to do the same thing that we are going to do through this video. So if you like reading articles, then you can go through that route or the video is still here. So let me just give you a little bit brief about what Redux is. So Redux is an extremely popular global states management system using especially React or React based frameworks like Next.js, like Gatsby. It might be also useful in White. So Redux is so much popular that at the time of shooting this video, there were 500 plus jobs in India itself. So it is a well demanded skill and something that each front end and full stack engineers should know. Okay, cool. So Redux itself solves the problem of prop drilling. So before Redux, traditionally, we used to create a state in a parent component. And if I want to share the state to some component that is way down the tree, way down DOM tree, I will have to share the state as prop from one component to another component to another child component to another child component. And this will keep going on until we reach the point where we need to use it. Now, Redux solves this problem directly by creating a global state. So global state means a state that is above all other uh, all other components in the DOM tree, right? So it is available across to your whole project, and it basically injects the state directly into your component where you need to use it instead of doing prop drilling and re-rendering all these components that come in line, right? So now you have some basic idea about Redux. I will not waste much time. Let's dive deep right into what npm libraries you need and how you can use them to set up Redux into the project. Okay, so let's open up our VS Code. So here you can see I have already created a basic Next.js project. So to the people who have never created a Next.js project, you just simply have to do npx create next app, and you can give any name to your project such as Redux POC or something else, right? So the project is right here. So once you create a project, it should look something like this. You should have an app folder, you should have a public folder, you should have some node modules already, right? Okay. Now let us first create some basic folder structure that you need to have so that you can organize your Redux files properly. I will just go to my root folder and create a new folder called Redux. And this is where all our Redux components would be. This is where our slices would remain. This is where my store would remain. This is where actions and reducers would be defined. So everything that is related to Redux would stay here, would be residing inside this folder. Now, let us create files for each of the things that I told you, right? So the first and foremost, most important part of Redux is store. So store is where all different states that we have, or yeah, all different states together stay. Store is a store of states. So I will create a file for it called store.ts. You should observe here that I'm using TypeScript. You can do similar for JavaScript as well. But I really recommend you using TypeScript since it is way more secure and restrictive than JavaScript. Right? The behavior is way predictable. Cool. So we have created a store.ts. We'll not write code into it right now. Let us just first create all the files that we need from the get-go. So one is store.ts. The another one that you might need is a file called combined reducers. Right. So keep in mind, you can name these files anything you want. I am naming them in such a way so that I know what exactly they are. So a combined reducers file will do exactly what it is named, that it will combine all different reducers that we will be creating throughout this project. Okay. So now another thing, and one more important candidate that we need is we need to create a folder for slices. Okay. So let me tell you what slices are. So as the word says, slice. A slice is basically a portion of something. So what is a slice a portion of? So in the Redux project, a slice is a portion of your state. So state is made up of multiple slices. So each portion of a state is called a slice. Cool. So I've created a slices folder. I've created a folder here because in majority of enterprise projects, even small scale project, you will have to create multiple slices across the board. Okay. Now that we have our basic folder structure in place, let us install the npm libraries that we need. So if you go to the same article, you might see that there are two npm libraries that we need to install. So the first one is npm install Redux.js toolkit. So Redux.js toolkit is the one that provides us with different methods that let us create our store, that let us create our slices, that let us define our reducers and actions that are provided to these reducers. Cool. So now you know why you need Redux.js toolkit. So let us go ahead and install it. So just paste the particular command and hit enter. So once you do that, within a minute or two, all the Redux.js toolkit libraries would get downloaded in your particular project. Similar fashion, the other library that we need is React Redux. Okay, so we'll just type in React Redux. Now React Redux here is useful because it provides you with two important functions. So the two functions that it provides is one is a use dispatch method and another is a use selector. We'll not dive deep into it, but basically React Redux provides you with functions that lets you fetch the current state from your store, and second, it lets you implement actions or call reducers that operate on your store to change it. So basically it lets you change your state and it lets you fetch your state. Simple enough. Okay. Now we have all the libraries that we needed. We have the basic folder structure in place. So let us get started on actually creating the particular Redux configuration. So the first thing that we need is let us create a slice. So I will be creating a simple counter project. So to the ones who don't know what a counter is simply keeps count of a number, right? It starts from 0, and if you increment something, it will turn to 1, 2, 3, and so on. Similar way, it will have another function called decrement, which will decrement it with 0, -1, -2, and so on. Okay. So to create a slice, as I told you, the method that is going to come in picture is called create slice, right? So create slice is imported from Redux.js toolkit. Now we have the method in place, right? So it accepts an JSON object which looks something like this. So this JSON object has a few properties. One is name. So then this name is the name of your slice that you are creating. Second, it accepts an initial state. So as I told you, we are creating a counter, but the counter has to have some initial number, right? So that is the initial state, the value of your state at the inception of the project. So initial state is 0. Then, as I told you, we are going to have two operations. One is an increment operation, another is decrement. So these two operations are basically your reducers. So a reducer is made up of two things. One is the action, and second is basically the operation that is going to perform. So you can see here, the action here is increment, and when an increment action is provided, it will run the particular operation that corresponds to it. Similarly, when decrement action is provided, it will run the basically subtraction operation that is connected to it. Now you have created a slice. Now let's store this slice inside something. So I will store it in a counter variable. So now I have created the slice, and then one last step that we need to do is we need to export our actions and we need to export our reducer, because the actions will be required or called by our dispatch function in the future and provided to the reducer so that operations could take place. In similar way, reducer needs to be exported because it needs to get connected to our Redux store. So let us do that. Here you can see that I have exported our actions, counter actions, and the next step is basically we will do export default counter reducer. So a slice basically provides you with two things, actions and reducer, and we have exported both of them. So this is how you have created your first slice, right? Now, as I told you, usually a project will have multiple slices. Right now I have just created one, but I'll still show you how you can combine different slices into a single reducer. So let us jump into our combined reducers. You might ask, Apurva, why are we in need of a combined reducer? So a Redux store accepts either one reducer or accepts either one combined reducer. So it will not accept multiple reducers if you provide to it as an array, but rather you need to use a combined reducer function and then provide the value that is returned to your store. So that is how the Redux structure or Redux flow works. So let us use the function combine reducers. Cool. Now, here you will mention the reducer that you had just created. So I will just go ahead, I will do import counter from the particular slice that I had created. So from /slices and counter, and just simply mention it here in the JSON object for the combined reducer. Now this will return you the combined reducer that it has generated. So let us put it in a variable combined reducer. Okay, and export it in similar fashion as we did for slice. You will ask, why do we export this? Because further we need to connect it to our Redux store. Only then the whole chain would work. Now, since we are talking about Redux store so much, let us create a Redux store. So for Redux store, the method that we will use is called configure store. You can observe that all these methods that we have used up till this point are coming from Redux.js toolkit. And a Redux, basically configure store method will accept a reducer, and this reducer would be accepting the combined reducer that we had created. So let us import that as well. We have imported the combined reducer, and I will be providing the same to the store. Now we have our first store in place, right? Usually a Redux project or any React or Next.js project, you are good enough with having one single store and you would rarely need more stores than this. So just export the store in similar fashion. Now you will ask me, Apur, why are we exporting the store, right? So that you have created a store now, but you need to make sure that this store is available across the application, right? But how will that happen? Here is where the React Redux library comes into place. So before doing that, let us create a few components which will actually use our store. So if you have used a Next.js application previously, you will know what a page routing means. So page routing, basically you create a folder called pages in your root folder, right? And here I will just create a component called a, right? So a.tsx, and I will simply create a React function for it. And we will return something like, yeah, this looks good enough, I guess, for our project. So let us see whether we are able to access this page actually or not. So to do that, to run a Next.js project, you need to type npm run dev. Now this usually takes a few minutes or two for starting up for the first time. So take rest, have a breath, and you should be good to go. Okay. Now let us check on Chrome if we are able to access it. So to access it, the default port is 3000 for a Next.js project. So you will type localhost 3000 and slash you will write the name of the component that you have created. So as we have created in the pages folder a component called A. So let us go and look for it. So you will see it takes some time. So for rendering the first component, it will take time because it is compiling it for the first time. But if as simple a component is, the lowest number of time it will take. And you can see here that the component is rendered and you can see the a text that we have added. Okay, now we have a component that we can actually use. Good. Let us have few more components in place, right, to make it a little bit complex. So I'll create a b component as well, b.tsx, and this function should also behave in similar fashion as a. Cool. Now just simply print b as well inside a so that we know the whole flow is working, the components are accessible and everything, right? Okay, so this should print a b. So if we go to our application, you can see that there's an a and there's an b. Let me zoom it for you. So you can see there's an a and there's an b. Okay, so we know that the whole flow is working and nothing is breaking. That's good enough for us. Okay, now as I told you, you need to provide your store to the particular to your particular component that wants to access your state. So let us go ahead and assume that I want to provide my store to component. Yeah. So to do that, we need to import a provider from the same library we talked about. So let us go import provider from React Redux library. So now I have provider in place. Let us mention it. So this provider basically accepts the component that we want to have our store, right? So yeah, so this is how basically you will provide the particular component as a children to the provider React node. Now the provider React node accepts one prop, one most important prop, and that is your store. So make sure to import store in place where you are using the provider, and you can see here that the particular flow is complete. So now the provider will take your store, give it to component B, and then B should be able to access it. But then you will ask, Apur, where are we actually using it, right? So you're correct. So to use it, if you remember, I mentioned a method called use selector. So let us use use selector here. Okay. So use selector is here. And okay. So here you can see a use selector. I have provided a method to the particular function that basically is that it is accepting the previous state, and or you could say the current state, and returning it to me. So that's all I wanted to do. I wanted to just return me the current state, right? No operations on that. You can write complex actions or operations on that if you want, but right now our aim is just to get our particular counter. So let us go ahead and put the particular selector into variable. So I will call it a counter payload. Cool. So we have a counter payload. Let us try to console log it. So I will be putting it inside a use effect because I don't want 10 million console logs in my terminal. So let us see what exactly does it provide us. So if Now here you can see that we have received an object from component B, and this, if we open it, you can see it has a key and value. The name of the key is counter, which was actually the name of your slice, and 0 here is basically the initial state. If you remember, when we were configuring our slice counter slice for the first time, the second prop that it asked us was your initial state. So 0 here is the initial state of the counter, the initial count. Cool. So we are able to access our slice or our state through use selector. But Apurva, where have we created the counter? You're right. So that is what we are going to do. We are going to have a counter that will show you the current value of count. We will have two buttons called increment and decrement, and all this will be connected to your Redux so that you can use it in similar fashion in all your different projects. So let us go back to VS Code and see what we can do. Now, instead of just typing B here, let me be a little bit more constructive. So I will type here the current count. Okay, and in the counter payload, if you remember right, we had a particular key called counter which had our count. So I am just trying to do the same here, counter payload dot counter. Make sure to give it a type as any for now. You can use more restrictive typecasting here, but for now, for the sake of this demo, I'm just using any type. Okay, then the next thing you need to do is you need to create buttons for increment and decrement. So let us have buttons for increment and a button for decrement. Cool. We have buttons for increment, decrement. We can see the current count, but you still need to connect your increment operation and decrement operation to these particular buttons. To do that, we will need to use the second method that we talked about, use dispatch method, right? So just simply call the use dispatch method, and whatever gets returned, you need to put it in a variable. So I'm putting everything in a variable called dispatch. So this variable dispatch actually contains your dispatch method, a method that accepts different actions that you have declared previously. And based on those actions, corresponding reducers will be called. Now, this all sounds a bit complex when I say it, but when I implement it, I think everything should be as clear as glass. Now, to do that, let us create an on-click event on our increment button. And when you call dispatch here, make sure to provide it with the increment action that you had mentioned in your counter slice. So if you see here, the increment is imported from your counter slice, and this is why we had exported our actions there, right? So we have an increment here, and I'm providing increment as a function to dispatch, right? Why is it a function? Because when I write increment, it is going to fetch the variable, the operation that was connected to the increment action, right? That is the addition operation, and it will be providing it to dispatch, and dispatch will then operate the respective operation on your current state and provide it with your latest state. Cool. Now we have connected our increment operation. In similar fashion, we will do the same for decrement. So here, just create the same on click, same dispatch, and just instead of increment, you will be using a decrement operation. Even decrement is going to be imported from the same place as before. Now we have increment in place, we have decrement in place, we have our current count. So let us see whether this code actually works or not. So for that, we need to go back to our Chrome and just refresh your particular website. So you can see we are inside a component, and a component is showing us our current count 0 and having two different buttons called increment and decrement. Cool. Now, if I click on increment, the count should increase. If I click on decrement, the count should decrease. Simple enough, right? So you can see here, I am clicking on increment, the count is changing. And in similar fashion, when I click on decrement, the count is decreasing. So basically, you have successfully created a Redux configuration, which is able to call your particular actions that you had defined. And this all is happening through two of the important libraries that we are using, Redux.js Toolkit and Redux React. So yeah, best of luck. Use this however you want. Remember, you can use more complex operations when you are actually creating these reducers. So I've created a simple example here, but in actual cases, there are other longer operations that take place. And thank you, like, subscribe, and see you in the next one.